All right. Have you ever worshiped an idol? Are you sure? What is the biblical definition of idol worship? We tend to think of idol worship as getting down on our knees and saying something like, "Oh, powerful rock. Oh, great piece of wood." Am I right? Anyway, did you know that some religions purposely make their doors short so that you will bow before their idol when you walk in? Did you know that simply lowering your eyes to an idol is idol worship by biblical standards? Did you know that praying to anyone other than Yahweh is idol worship by Bible standards? The name of this message is Romancing the Stick, the Stone, and Other Things Unknown. Please stand and cover yourselves for the reading of our scripture. For those of you who may not know, I'm tethered, so it's difficult. I can't get up. It's not a Bible command, by the way. It's a tradition that we do like to follow if we can. If you don't follow it, not comfortable with it, it's okay. You're not breaking any of God's laws. But we do it because Yeshua did it, his Talmudim, disciples did it, and their disciples did it. And anyway, it's a good thing. So we begin with Shemot, which is known as Exodus in the Western world. Chapter 20, we're going to go through verses 3, 4, and 5, which say, Lo yiyeh lecha Elohim acherim al panayah. Verse 4, Lo ta'aseh lecha pesel v'chol te'muna asher bashamayim mima'al va'asher ba'aretz mitachat va'asher ba'mayim mitachat la'aretz. Verse 5, Lo tish tachve lahem velo ta'avdem ki anohi Yahweh Elohecha el kana. All right, you may be seated. So our first verse is Shemot, or Exodus, chapter 20, verse 3. And we begin with the word lo, which is no, it's not. It's the negative article. So it's going to be attached to something. It's going to make something negative, right? I think I just clicked something I shouldn't have. Oh, I surely did. Oh, just lost everything on my monitor. Here we go. There we go. So our next word is yiyeh, which is, actually it's was, is, will be. It's to be, to exist, to, or to become. It was to be, to exist. I mean, it's those things. And then it says, lecha, to you. So it will not be to you. It will not exist to you. This thing should not come to pass to you. Then it says Elohim. That's the plural of God. So it's gods, not God, but gods. In English, you would translate it as God. But the thing about the word Elohim is it's plural, and they use the word in plural among the Hebrew language, among the Jews, because if your God is alive, your God has many attributes. Happy face, a sad face. Even when your God is asleep, if he ever does such things, his face would always be moving. Right? I mean, watch someone sleep. The face moves. It doesn't stop moving. Even the body moves. It may stay still for just a moment, but eventually it's going to move, right? And so if it's a God that's alive, it's spoken of in plural. And so if it's alive physically, if it's the living God, then they have to say the living gods. And if it's alive to you, even if it's a stick or a stone, they're going to still use Elohim because it's just a plural. It's a generic word for God. So it's used of real gods and fake gods alike. And the only time they use it in plural of fake gods is when it's alive in your heart. When you believe it's real, then they will give it the courtesy of using it in plural. But I don't understand that part. But they do, in fact, do that. There is a proverbial expression found in Habakkuk. You guys have probably heard it called Habakkuk, chapter 1, verse 11, of an obstinate, self-confident man whose own strength is his God. In other words, it's someone who despises every God and confides in his own strength and his own sword and his own might, right? This is somebody who essentially thinks of himself as his own God. There's a couple of notes here. One is that not a few interpreters, both ancient and modern, have regarded Elohim as also denoting angels and judges. You find that in the biblical text as well. They do, in fact, call what we think of as angels in the West, and we do that because the Catholics did that. But these are messengers. The Melachim are messengers from heaven, and they were in fact called gods. But men were also called gods. If they were a king or someone of high stature, some hero in a war, they called them gods, Elohim, because in the end, it doesn't mean the God. It's not speaking of the one and only God. It's just a generic word, and its real meaning behind it is hero or mighty hero. And so they use it of the real God because he's the mightiest of all heroes. So you can see why they use it that way. But it's never was really intended to be God. It certainly was never intended to be God's name. There's another note here. The God of anyone is the God whom anyone worships. We need to keep that in mind. If you worship something, that thing is your God. A God over that which the God presides, or that which he created, just as Mars is called the god of war. So Mars in Greek mythology, he's the god that created war, so he's called the god of war. All right, so you have, for some people, they have the god of chaos, the god of television, the god of money, the god of shopping, the God of depression, the God of raising kids, the God of anger, the God of volunteering, the God of selfishness, the God of hunting, the God of self-pity, the God of exercise, the God of laziness, the God of fishing, the God of self-righteousness, the God of deadliness, the God of loneliness, the God of skiing, the God of arrogance, the God of me time, the God of sadness, the God of camping, the God of pride, the God of family time. So when they say that the God of anyone is the God whom anyone worships, they're really talking about that thing that is the most important in your life. That thing that if somebody was to describe the sum total of your life, would they say that person was a religious person, or that person was all about skiing, or that person was all about football, or that person was all about computers? That's what they're talking about, that sum total of your life. It's followed by the word acherim, which is after. Properly, it's following another, not the first. It's the second. It's the one that's behind. It's from the idea of following. There's some examples. One in the Reshit, or Genesis. I start to say Gesenius. Genesis 17:21. In the following year, next year. Yeshayahu, or Isaiah 42:8 says, and I will not give my glory, this is God speaking, and I will not give my glory to another, to somebody who's followed me. In other words, there's no one before him, there's none beside him, so it's going to have to be someone behind him. And God's not going to give his glory to that one either. Tehillim, by the way, that's also an absolute, God is absolutely saying there's none before me, there's none beside me, and I won't share any with anyone behind me. And there are gods. God would not tell us not to worship another God if another God didn't exist. We have to get this in our minds. There's only one real God. That's Yahweh God. He created everything, right? But there are fake gods that become real to us, thus calling them Elohim, gods in plural, because they become more important to us than the real God. We set aside the real God to do this thing that's so much more important. And that's a sad state of affairs. But it's after God, right? Because God came first. All right, what was the other one? Tehillim, Psalm 16:4, who hasten elsewhere. In other words, from the true God to idols. It's not a real good example, but it was one that was given. It's from the root ahar, which is to be after, behind, to stay behind, hence to tarry, to defer, to delay. All right, so then we have the next word is all, which is upon. It's something that sets on something else. So if you pour a foundation and you build something on that foundation, there's your word. So it's just like our word on. Then it's on what? It's on panayah, which is, we think of panah, panay, the face, but it's, they use this word not just of the face, but they use this word of the turning of a face. It's not so much the face as it is turning towards something. And we need to get that. It's not always of the face itself, but it's the turning towards something, because in the end, it's to be in the presence of something. It's when in Hebrew we say that we are before the face of God, means that we are in the presence of God. Because if you're in the presence of God, you don't have your back to him, you have your face to him. And when you bring your sacrifice before the presence of God, or before the face of God, you bring it to his face. He doesn't have his face turned away from us. He has his face turned toward us. So it's of that turning, but it's to be in the presence of someone. So here's the translation of Shemot, or Exodus 23. There should never exist to you other gods that you follow, lean and stand upon before my face. This should never happen. That's one of God's first rules. This should never, ever happen. You should not bring another God into the presence of Yahweh. Think about that. When we come into the presence of Yahweh, when we come in through this crazy world and we got all caught up in all of our whatever was so important that day, if for some reason we've let something come between us and God, we need to leave it outside the door before we come into the praise, saying, look, I know it's going to happen. I know you live in a world where they're everywhere. But when you come into my presence, check it at the door. So it's important for us to understand that. In the next verse, verse 4, it's Shemot, or Exodus 20. Now we're on to verse 4. We start with lo. So here's another negative article. No, not. This is ta'asheh. And when they put the T sound in the beginning of a word, what they're doing is it's either making it feminine or it's making it a command. And in this case, it's a command. It's shall. So it shall make, because it's asa is the word. It's to labor, to work about, to make anything, to manufacture something, to produce something. And it says lecha. So you shall not produce something. And it says pesel. This is an interesting word. A graven image. You shall not produce a graven image. The graven image of an idol, something that's made of wood or even molten. If you think about it, well, this isn't graven because they poured it into to a mold and nobody carved it. Sorry. We got to really talk about what this is. It's from the root pasal, which is to cut, to carve, to form by cutting. It's used of stones, of course, speaking of idols, made of stone, wood, or any other substance. But they're talking about something that is largely lost in the Western world. They're talking about something that is three-dimensional. That's literally what this word means. Of course, they didn't have the concept of, well, they probably had the concept, but they didn't really have wording, at least the word 3D or three-dimensional back in this time period. So what they did was they said you can't carve something. And what happens when you carve something? It becomes three-dimensional, right? You chisel something out in a stone, you make this little image of a man, or you make an image of a lion, or an image of a bird, or whatever it is that you've made. It makes, even if it's an image of a house, it's three-dimensional. And that's the whole point. You cannot make something You've just been told, never let this happen. You cannot make something three-dimensional. And when you start thinking about things that are three-dimensional, and this is where I get very unpopular with so many people, especially those who have children. Think about your teddy bears and your stuffed animals and your G.I. Joes and your Barbies and stuff like that. They are three-dimensional. You're not supposed to have things that are three-dimensional. This is God's law, not Robert's law. What happens when you have things that are three-dimensional? You, what's the word? You dull the senses. Desensitize. That's you desensitize your children to things that they should not be desensitized to. When they are given these graven images and these things like this, they don't see three-dimensional images as bad, and they should. So you take them to a restaurant, when they go to a restaurant when they grow up, and it's got all these lions and tigers and bears, oh my, in the front of it, and they walk right past it, maybe even pet them and touch them and talk about how pretty they are. They go inside and there's a big Buddha, and maybe they stick some money down there and rub on its belly and say, I hope I get some good luck. They have no idea what they've just done. And even if they don't touch them, even if they don't put the money down, even if they don't rub the belly, they've gone into that place, they've done business with that place, and they've advanced the what's the word I'm looking for here? They've advanced the cause of the idol. That's idol worship. It truly is by Bible standards, because it's the three-dimensional items. And these particular graven images are in fact idols. Some graven images are not idols. You gotta know the difference. It's going to go on and talk about you're not supposed to have things that fly in the air. You can't have birds. You can't have things that walk, crawl, or slither on the ground. So you can't have people, animals, snakes, worms. You can't have starfish. You can't have things like that are graven. There is a gray area. You see people that, they shoot a deer and they stuff it on a wall. That's not graven. Think about it. That's kind of a gray area there, because that was not a graven image. That was real. So, and if you have a real starfish, well, that's probably against the law now. When I was a kid, we had them. We'd find them washed up on the beach, and we knew they were dead, and you'd gather them. But that's kind of the gray area, because those were real. But creepy the starfish isn't so creepy, but the I never understood sticking heads of animals on the wall. But that's not against the rules, because it's real. But when you get into the other area, so what graven images could you have? Well, you could have, say, you got a little girl and you want to buy her a little house. What are those called? The dollhouse. Yeah, I knew playhouse wasn't right. It was close. I knew that wasn't right. The dollhouse. But the problem is, it's a slippery slope. You get her the dollhouse, you get her all the little furniture, and she can do all the setup. What's the next thing that's going to be happening? She'll have Barbies in there, and you see how that can be a slippery slope, because it's just a hair's breadth away from breaking God's law. So it can be a dangerous thing to do. Though the house itself is three-dimensional, it's not something that flies in the air. At least it shouldn't. It's not something that walks, crawls, or slithers on the ground, and it's not something that swims in the waters. So some three-dimensional items are in fact acceptable. A house, a car. But again, you give your little boys cars and stuff like that, you got to be careful, because before you know it, they got the little G.I. Joe man sitting in the little car pushing him around, right? So you have to pay attention to things like that, because you do not want to desensitize your children to any of God's laws. Because if you desensitize them to one law, that opens the door to desensitizing them to God knows how many laws. Because once a child learns that there's something more important than God's law, how far is it until there's plenty of things more important than God's law? Anyway, let's move on. We follow that at the next word in our verse here is behol, which is and all, or I have any for some reason, but whole or kol is totality, and it has the conjunction on the front of it. Then it says temunah, which is, here we have three-dimensional. It's a form, a three-dimensional form. They didn't know what to do with this word when they first started translating it into English. They would use the word form, or they would use the word appearance, or the word image, like Job, or you guys, you hear Job in that 4:16. A certain appearance passed before my eyes, and so they don't know what to do with that. But what they're saying is whatever it was that went before his eyes was three-dimensional, is what he was literally saying. But it's difficult to translate from the Hebrew into the English. At least it was back when they were doing this, because we didn't have that term in English. It's from the root moon, not the thing in the sky. It's the Hebrew word moon. Its form, hence a species, a kind, a sort. It denotes both form and kind. It denotes something that's living and breathing. And then in our next word is asher, which means that. Sometimes it means which. Kind of, it's totally interchangeable because they both essentially mean the same thing. Then we have bashamayim. So here we have in. They usually say heavens, but what are they saying? In the skies. We don't know what's in the heavens. We've never seen what's in the heavens. If you believe the Catholics, there's little babies with wings on them floating around shooting arrows at everybody. Come on, this is not in the Bible. Or you think you know what I'm saying? I mean, they've kind of made this whole angelology thing up, but and that would be another gray area, because nobody has any idea what an angel looks like, because they say, well, but there were angels on the ark. This is true, but nobody knows what an angel looks like. Where we would get in trouble is trying to make them look human, because the human parts would be wrong. So if you made it look like an alien with the big eyes and the you might could get away with that, because that would be, you probably should stay away. It's a slippery slope. Anyway, so sky, you need to not think of the heavens, you need to think of the sky. So you're not supposed to have a three-dimensional form of anything that flies in the sky. So whether it's an ancient bird, fossil, what are those things? No, condor's not the right thing. No, the old bird that looks really weird with the long beak. Pterodactyl. You can't have a pterodactyl because it used to fly in our skies, and you can't have a bald eagle, and you can't have a Tweety bird. You're not allowed to have these things because there are real ones that flew in the sky, either do or did fly in the sky. That is right here. It says you can't have anything three-dimensional of anything that flies in the sky. Then it says Mima'al, which is above, Allah, which is something that flies on high, basically. Then it says Va'asher, and that is Ba'aretz, that's in the earth. And then it says Mitahat, which is from beneath, Va'asher, that is from beneath, Ba'mayim, the water. So you're not allowed to have these three-dimensional forms of things that fly in the sky, things that walk, crawl, slither, whatever it is that they do, things that breathe life. We could think of trees and flowers and things like that as alive, because they are. They live and they die, right? But this is not what they're talking about. They're talking about a plant and a tree cannot walk. We need to make this distinction. They cannot walk, they cannot fly, they cannot crawl, they cannot slither. So yes, you can have a three-dimensional carving of a tree. You can have a three-dimensional carving of a flower, of plants, and you can have fake plants in your house, and and things like that. You can have those things because they are not off limits. But when you get to birds, cattle, dogs, uh, think about that for the older people in our audience. You remember Roy Rogers? He had his horse Trigger and his, what was that dog's name? I don't, Bullet, Silver Bullet, or something like that. He had them both stuck. I find that very creepy. But again, not against God's law because they were real. You know what I'm saying? They were real. So it's not against God's law. Still creepy. I wouldn't want it in my house. But, you know, again, that's not against God's law because that was real. But if you carved one or, you know, somehow poured one in a mold, doesn't make any difference how you get it. If it's not real, if it didn't actually breathe and walk, fly, swim in the water, whatever, at some point, then that's what we are forbidden to have. So stuffed animals never did that, did they? They never breathe. They never walk. They never. A stuffed animal does not do that. A well, I guess that kind of covers everything. You know, a lion in front of your house. You know how people put a lion in, on each side of their sidewalk. You see that in a lot of homes. Those lions were probably never real. They're usually made out of cement, right? So that's forbidden. Those are things that we're not allowed to do, even if those lions were never worshipped. You know, I don't know of anyone who actually worships lions, unless the Hindus might. I'm not positive about that. Not real up on my Hindu worship. But uh, even if they're not, it doesn't matter. If they weren't an idol, you are not allowed to make them. You're not allowed to have them. It doesn't mean that other people aren't. It means that you aren't. See, that's the thing we got to always keep in mind. We're not allowed to. We're the ones that are Torah observant. We're the ones that live according to God's law. People who do not live according to God's law are, we have no right to tell them, oh, you can't have that in front of your house. You can't be doing that. You got to be wearing your fringe. Whoa, well, your head's not covered when you're. No, that's not. We're responsible for us and us alone. We're not responsible for everybody else. What they do is what they do. We're only responsible for what we do. And we got to always keep that in mind. So if we go to a restaurant, the first thing we always do when my wife and I go to a restaurant, the first thing we do is look for idols. We went to one last week. There were graven images all over the place, but there were no idols. So we ate there. If it wasn't good, we'll never go back. It was terrible. But if it had been good, you know, it was a little creepy. Some of the stuff was just creepy. But uh, it, I hope you understand the difference. If you eat in a place where they really have idols because there was a restaurant down here, and we went in and we looked around, and we didn't see any idols anywhere. And so we were eating there about once or twice a month. That's about all we could afford. Oh, it was just wonderful food. And then one day we sat down. They set us down, and we look up, and there's an idol right there at our table. You know, hanging on the wall right above our table. And we're like, the one restaurant, the one good restaurant we have in our town, just went down the toilet for us. We can't go back. We're not going to ask them to take their idol down. That's their thing. If they want an idol in their building, that is completely up to them. But we can't go back. You know, I mean, we could go back and look and see if they ever took it down. We could. And if they took it down, we could go back and eat there. But we've never gone back. You know, it's just like, man, that just really stunk. Because there's not that many great places to eat around here. But it's something that we keep in mind because, you know, we want to follow God's law to the best that we can. All right, so here's our translation of verse 4. Do not labor, work about, make, produce, manufacture, fabricate for yourselves idols or images graven, cut, or carved from any substance of absolutely all forms, images, or species, that are in the sky above, or that is in the earth below, or that is in the water below the earth. There was something I saw there that I thought I should point this out. Oh, one of the reasons why I think it's written this way, many times over the years when the Jews were enslaved, many of them were forced to make idols. Notice it says, don't do this for yourself. If you're being forced to make an idol, you are not committing a sin. For one thing, you're not doing it for yourself. You're doing it for whoever's forcing you to do it. So keep that in mind. If communists ever take over our country and make us make idols, you'll know that you're okay. I'll throw that in there. All right, verse 5. We start off with lo, our negative article, and then tish tachve. Again, this starts with the T sound. It's the command. You will not bow down. This is in heat pile, which is a grammar thing in Hebrew. Doesn't mean much to people in English. This is to prostrate oneself before anyone out of honor. To prostrate. This is different than this, right? Because you do realize that in the time of Yeshua, people did that. As a matter of, we shake hands, they bowed their head. That was apparently acceptable. Even in the time of Daniel, when the three Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego guys, they wouldn't prostrate themselves. It was one thing to show respect by bowing your head. It was another to get down on your hands and knees. Thought I'd point that out. Those who use this mode of salutation fell on their knees and touched the ground with the forehead, and this honor was not only shown to superiors such as kings and princes, but also to equals. That's showing a lot of honor there. To worship a deity, hence to honor God with prayers, even without prostration of body. So that's getting away from this particular heat pile. This is getting more into the root of it too, in that it's considered worship when you bow your body down. To do homage, ceremonial acknowledgement, special honor or respect shown or expressed publicly. This is important. To do homage, ceremonial acknowledgement, special honor or respect shown or expressed publicly, to submit oneself. Why is this important? Because if we participate in something like Easter, Christmas, Valentine's Day, Halloween, we're doing homage, we're part of the ceremonial acknowledgement, we're showing the honor and the respect publicly, we're worshiping idols. That's very important for us to understand. The next word in Hebrew is lachem. It's to them. Don't do that to them. Don't show them that public respect. Don't be a part of those ceremonies. And these are ceremonies. All of this is ceremonial. The putting of the tree, that comes from the Druids. They used to take the tree, put it in the middle of their town square, and dress it up and put gifts under it. All of it comes from some pagan idol worshiping deal, because the Catholics were trying to pull every religion under the world into one place. They were not trying to push the gospel of Jesus on anybody. They were trying to make one religion, thus the word Catholic. Universal is what it means. And they spoke about the need for a universal religion. It was started not by Christians, it was started by philosophers. And the philosophers thought that if they brought in all of the religions of the world and took all of the little things together, maybe we'll throw the killing of the children part out, and because that's a little too ugly for some. Let's let them keep their kids, and because we need to keep this thing going so that the money keeps coming in. I mean, they threw some of the ritual out, and they rearranged some of the ritual here and some of the ritual there. They took the Pesach and turned it into Ishtar worship, where they decorated the eggs and they looked for the eggs, all about fertility. And Pesach has nothing to do with fertility. It has so infiltrated the psyche of the Western world that even the Jews put that egg on their Pesach plate. It's a complete disgrace. But that's what happens. Things just kind of get backward engineered into things. Anyway, so our next word is lo, which is the negative article, and this is ta'avdem. You will not serve them. You won't work for them. You won't follow after them. You won't till the field for them. You won't work their vineyards or their gardens. You won't do artists. You won't be an artisan for them. You won't create things for them, create idols of them. To give an example in that Rashid, which is I keep wanting to say Genesis 15:13, and they, the Israelites, shall serve them, the Egyptians, and they, the Egyptians, shall evil entreat them. To serve God or idols, in other words, to worship God or an idol. If you serve something, you worship. Here's what's one of the other things that's missing in our understanding of idol worship. In everyday life, you see a lot of women who go in and they cook the meal and they get it all prepped and they go over there and they fix the plate for their husband and they set it down in front of their husband and they make sure he's got plenty to drink and they just serve that guy just hand and foot, right? That's worship. It is literally worship. The that started something, everybody. It's literally worship, and that is acceptable between married couples. Just saying. But when you, like I said, when you go into a restaurant and you buy food where they have idols and stuff like that, you are furthering the cause of idol worship. You are worshiping. When you put idols in your house or out in front of your house, you bought them, you paid for them, you put them in there, you're furthering the cause. You're worshiping. When you bow your head to an idol, that's worship. Bow your head to a human being, that's considered just being respectful, because it's the old way of shaking hands, like I said. It's a kind of a gray area, to tell you the truth. I'm not sure I understand how the Jews got to that point where they would bow their heads like that, but they did. And they would say, my Lord, to people who weren't even their lords. So, that carried over into the English the world as well, into the West. People saying my Lord. We don't do that anymore, but now, they used to say sir and ma'am. You hardly find that anymore. It's just like we're getting less and less civil to each other. But it kind of started off as the bowing of the head. You just kind of got to be careful there, because if you bow it in front of an idol, you really are worshiping, which is why some of those people, that some of the religions make their doors so short. They want to make sure not just your head, they're hoping that your whole body bows when you walk in the door. It's very dominant in the Eastern countries. So you don't want to be a slave to something. If something is more important to you than God, it is your God. That became your God, because the most important thing is supposed to be what? God. So whatever is the most important becomes your God. And when it's more important, then it's what you worship. All right, so we have ki, which is for, Anohi, for I, Yahweh, for I am Yahweh Eloheha, I am Yahweh your God. Let's see, I've got a note here. Okay, I've already said that.
What about culture? I mean, you got the Japanese who, on greeting each other, do a bow, which is their culture. They're honoring, I guess, but they're not worshiping. I don't see that as worship, but I wanted your thought on that.
Right. So I'm being asked here about what about in Japan? They bow their head and all that. Well, that's what I'm saying. Even the Jews of the time of Yeshua, the time of Jesus, for those of you who don't know who Yeshua is, they bowed their head just like what you're talking about. That started in the East. Of course, Japan's in the East, by the way. For those of you who don't know that, did you know that Israel was in the East, and that Israelites, people from Israel, are considered to be Asian? I'm just saying. But yeah, it's not worship when you're doing it to now. I think where you have the really questionable area is when you bow before a king. I think it gets questionable there. But the Jews would have done that in the first century. They would have bowed before the heads of state, before their kings and stuff like that. I'm positive of that. They wouldn't have made a connection there. The main thing is to remember is that you're not supposed to prostrate yourself. Prostrate, I'm saying the wrong word. You're supposed to prostrate yourself, or you're not allowed to do that. So I think that the bowing of the head, though it's a little grayish, I still think it's acceptable when you're showing uh, respect to somebody. As a matter of respect, if we go to Japan or someone from Japan is here and we're the ones that are supposed to meet them for the sake of our country or our company or whatever it is that we're doing, I think that showing that kind of respect is acceptable. I really do. But it does get a little dicey when you start getting into the Emperor of Japan comes along. I think as long as it's just the head, or even if the shoulders bow a little bit, I think you're still okay because the law is prostrate. If you get down on your knees and put your head to the ground, now I think you've really messed up. That's where you have to draw the line and say, I'm sorry, my God will not allow me to do this. And I don't know of anyone who asks you to do that anymore anyway. It's been a long time since anyone was that egotistical. Hopefully that answered your question. So our next word was El, which is the mighty hero word. And this is Kana, zealous. This is a cool word. Gesenius, this is why I keep thinking this word. Gesenius connected this word with the idea of jealous. Used of God as not bearing any rival, the severe avenger of departure from himself. But the Septuagint used the word zelotes. It is where we get the word zealous. It is from the Greek word zelos. Zelotes is from zelos. You hear zealous in there, don't you? Which is the equivalent of kina, to burn with zeal for any person or thing, to be zealous of anyone's cause, ardent zeal towards anyone, ardent love. And this is the right understanding. Gesenius was wrong. And Gesenius may not have been wrong. It's probably the English translator that was wrong. Gesenius was really, really good on his Hebrew, but he wrote it in German. I don't do German. I don't have any knowledge of German, so I couldn't check his work, is what I'm trying to tell you. So it could have been Gesenius making the mistake, but I think it's more likely it was the translator that made the mistake. Anyway, so our translation of our last verse here, Shemot, Exodus 25, is do not show honor, pray to, worship, or engage in ceremony, standing up or prostrate to them, nor labor, work, or serve, or become their slave. Because I, Yahweh your God, the mightiest of heroes, am zealous of your cause, and full of ardent love for you. I mean, besides, he's the only real God out there that could even be that way. So what is idol worship? Anything that we place between us and God. That is idol worship, pure and simple. quickest, easiest way. I've already said the restaurant thing. We purchase statues and candles. If we, purchase statues and candles bearing the likeness of saints, angels, Jesus, Mary, the list is almost without end, and pray to them, that's idol worship. But even if we don't, we keep their memory alive by purchasing them. We keep that thing going. How do we worship idols? We keep them alive by praying to them. We participate in their rituals publicly and privately. What are the rituals? Well, setting up trees, hanging the trimming on them, boiling eggs, painting them, hiding them, teaching our children to find them. We dress up like angels and shepherds. We tell ourselves it was good enough for us when we were children. It should be good, and it was good enough for our parents. It should be good enough for our children. We keep it alive. Who are we harming? It's just so cute. It's Robert's just being a fanatic. This isn't cute. It is blatant disregard for the commandments set out by God Almighty. We let things come between us and God. What are those things? Chaos, depression, selfishness, laziness, loneliness, sadness, raising our children, sports, hobbies, deadlines. What is an idol? It's a security blanket. It's a God we feel that we can control. It's an excuse for the lack of manners and self-control. It's an excuse for living life as though there are no consequences for our actions. Why? Because we serve a God created, formed and fashioned by our own hands, by the engraving tools of our own minds. It's time to stop romancing this stone. It's time to let go rather of our need for control. It's time to drop our idols and stand face to face with our King. There is no idol that is zealous for our cause. It can't be. There is no idol that possesses an ardent love for us. There is no idol that turns his face towards us. But we need to turn our face toward the one true God. Give him your undivided attention. You already have his. Shalom, shalom.